This message found you because something in your consciousness has reached a precise point of readiness, not curiosity, not coincidence. Readiness. You didn't click this by accident. You didn't arrive here randomly. You felt a subtle pull, almost like recognition, because your awareness has been circling the same invisible perimeter for a long time, and now the perimeter has opened. Right now, your consciousness is touching what quantum science would call an observer loop, a closed circuit where attention keeps collapsing the same probability waves over and over, creating a reality that feels familiar, predictable, and quietly exhausting. You may not have had language for it, but you felt it. That strange sensation that life keeps replaying similar scenes with different faces, the same emotional patterns, the same internal conversations, the same moments where you think, haven't I already lived this? And the moment you became aware of that, feeling truly aware, you stepped onto the edge of something hidden. You see, most people never notice the loop. Their attention is too fused with it. But you've always had a different relationship with awareness. You notice patterns. You feel timing shifts. You sense when reality pauses for a split second, like it's waiting for you to choose something differently. That sensitivity isn't imagination. It's quantum perception. Your consciousness doesn't just experience reality, it participates in selecting it. And lately, the selection has begun to loosen. You've probably noticed subtle distortions, time behaving strangely, days collapsing into each other, then suddenly stretching wide with meaning. Moments of déjà vu that feel deeper than memory, almost like echoes from parallel timelines brushing against your awareness. That's not confusion. That's your observer function starting to disengage from automatic repetition. Here's the truth most people never hear. The observer loop doesn't break through force, effort, or positive thinking. It breaks through recognition. And recognition is happening now. Your quantum field has been broadcasting a signal quietly, consistently searching for a frequency that could interrupt the repetition without collapsing your stability. And this message is that interruption. A synchronization point, a mirror designed not to tell you who to become, but to remind you of what you already are. Because your consciousness is not linear. It never was. You've had flashes, moments where synchronicity stacked so perfectly it felt scripted, times when you knew something before it happened, not as prediction, but as familiarity, as if the future had already left fingerprints on the present. Those moments weren't anomalies, they were leaks, pressure points in the loop. And now, the pressure has reached threshold. What's opening isn't just insight, it's access. When the observer loop loosens, hidden layers of the quantum field become visible. Possibilities you couldn't perceive before, not because they didn't exist, but because your attention was trained to look elsewhere. This is the destiny call, not to elevate you above others, but to invite you into coherence with yourself, to stop recycling awareness and begin participating consciously. And as you listen, something subtle is happening beneath thought. Your nervous system is softening, your attention is slowing. Your awareness is no longer scanning for confirmation, it's resting. That rest is not passive, it's powerful. Because when the observer rests, reality prepares to reorganize. And in the stillness opening right now, the loop has begun to show its seams. Now that your awareness has slowed enough to see it, the pattern becomes undeniable. You begin to recognize how often your life has felt like a variation of the same moment, dressed in different circumstances, different locations, different people, but the same internal response, the same emotional gravity pulling you back into familiar outcomes. This is where most people look away, but you don't. You lean in. You start to notice how certain situations trigger you with surgical precision, how the same themes resurface, no matter how much you change the external details. You change jobs, but the same frustration follows. You change relationships, but the same emotional dynamic reappears. You take breaks, travel, reset, but something always loops back. That looping sensation isn't failure, it's feedback. In quantum terms, your consciousness has been collapsing the same probability wave repeatedly. Not because you want to, but because your observer function has been conditioned to recognize specific emotional signatures as real. Your attention keeps locking onto familiar frequencies, and the quantum field responds by delivering more of the same. This is why effort alone hasn't worked. You may have tried manifestation techniques, affirmations, visualizations. You may have done inner work, therapy, spiritual practice. And while each of these gave you insight, none of them fully released the repetition. Because the issue was never the content of your thoughts, it was the orientation of your awareness. Your observer has been circling the same coordinates. You can feel it most clearly in moments of déjà vu, not the casual kind, but the kind that stops you mid-thought, the kind where you know what someone is about to say before they say it, where you sense the outcome of a conversation before it finishes unfolding. That's not prediction, that's pattern recognition operating too efficiently. Your consciousness became so good at recognizing what comes next that it stopped allowing anything else in. And then there's time. Time has not been behaving normally for you. Some days feel dense, heavy, stretched thin. Others disappear without memory. Weeks pass without landmarks. Then suddenly, a single moment feels infinite, like everything pauses just long enough for you to feel something click. This temporal distortion is diagnostic. It signals that your awareness has been oscillating between timelines without fully anchoring into any of them. You've been half present in many realities, fully embodied in none. That's what keeps the loop alive. You may also notice a subtle exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. Not physical tiredness, but existential fatigue, the kind that comes from repeating awareness rather than expanding it. Your system is tired of recognizing the same reality over and over again. And beneath that fatigue is something sharper, irritation with the predictable. You've grown intolerant of surface-level conversations. You feel restless in routines that once felt stable. You sense that something is wrong, not with your life, but with the way it keeps arranging itself. That irritation is intelligence. Because your consciousness is no longer satisfied with operating inside a closed loop, it wants novelty, not entertainment, but new probability, new informational input, new coherence patterns. This is why familiar advice no longer helps. Why generic motivation feels hollow. Why explanations that once comforted you now feel incomplete. You've outgrown them because your observer has reached the edge of its training. And here's the most important diagnosis of all. You are not stuck because you're doing something wrong. You are looping because your awareness has become too consistent. Consistency feels safe. Predictability feels controllable. But in the quantum field, consistency collapses possibility. When the observer becomes predictable, reality mirrors that predictability back. This is why breaking the loop feels scary. Because the loop is familiar, even when it hurts. Your system learned long ago that recognition equals safety. So it keeps choosing what it recognizes, even if that recognition carries limitation, disappointment, or delay. But now, something new is happening. Your observer has begun to notice itself, noticing. That subtle self-awareness, the moment you realize how you've been paying attention, is the crack in the loop. Because once attention becomes visible to itself, it can no longer operate unconsciously. And unconscious loops cannot survive conscious observation. The repetition you've been feeling was never punishment, it was preparation. Your awareness needed to become sharp enough to detect the loop without collapsing under it. And now it is. Because in the very act of diagnosing the pattern, your consciousness has already stepped partially outside of it. Which means the next phase is no longer about what's wrong. It's about what's activating. What's activating now is not a belief, not a mindset, not even a new way of thinking. It's a recalibration of how your consciousness interfaces with the quantum field itself. This is the moment where science and mysticism stop contradicting each other and begin describing the same mechanism from different angles. In quantum physics, reality does not exist as a fixed structure. It exists as a field of probabilities, waves of potential that remain uncollapsed until observed. Observation doesn't just see reality, observation selects it. And the quality of that observation determines which probability becomes solid. Here's the part that changes everything. Your observer loop wasn't created by bad choices or negative thoughts. It was created by coherence. Without flexibility, your awareness became extremely coherent, but only within a narrow band of frequencies. You learned how to stabilize reality, but not how to move through it. Think of it like this. Coherence is power, but coherence without adaptability becomes confinement. Your consciousness mastered a specific vibrational lane early in life, often through necessity, emotional survival, social adaptation. Repetition taught your nervous system what to expect, and expectation taught the quantum field what to deliver. Over time, your observer became efficient, too efficient. It stopped sampling the field broadly and began collapsing the same probability patterns automatically. This is why the loop feels intelligent, why it adapts just enough to keep you engaged, why it gives you almost what you want, but never quite the breakthrough. Because the loop is not an enemy. It's an outdated operating system, and now that system is being upgraded. This upgrade doesn't happen in the mind. It happens in the body field interface, where attention, emotion, and nervous system converge. That's why you may feel this shift physically before you can explain it intellectually. You may notice subtle sensations, pressure at the chest, heat in the spine, tingling in the hands or scalp. Not because anything mystical is happening, but because your sensory bandwidth is expanding. Your body is recalibrating to hold a wider range of informational input. In quantum biology, DNA is not static code. It's a responsive antenna. It reacts to coherence, stress, emotion, and awareness. When your observer function changes, your DNA expression follows. That's what's happening now. Your system is learning how to observe without fixation. Instead of collapsing the field from expectation, your awareness is beginning to rest in neutral presence. This creates something rare, coherent openness, a state where consciousness is stable enough to hold uncertainty without trying to resolve it. And uncertainty is where new timelines live. This is why forcing change never worked for you. Force tightens coherence. It sharpens fixation. But transformation requires soft coherence, attention that is steady but not gripping. You're entering that state now. You may have noticed that when you stop trying to figure things out, insights arrive on their own. When you release urgency, synchronicities increase. When you don't chase clarity, clarity finds you. That's not coincidence. That's your observer learning a new posture. In this posture, the quantum field responds differently. It no longer mirrors expectation, it mirrors availability. Instead of delivering what you anticipate, it delivers what's compatible with your expanded coherence. This is the upgrade. It's why the same old triggers don't hook you the same way anymore. Why reactions dissolve faster. Why emotions move through you instead of defining you. Your observer is no longer attaching identity to experience, it's letting experience pass through awareness. That single shift changes everything. Because identity is what locks timelines. When you believe this is who I am, your observer selects probabilities that confirm it. When identity loosens, the field opens. New configurations become accessible. You're not becoming someone new. You're removing constraints from how reality recognizes you. And here's the critical point most teachings miss. This upgrade is irreversible once embodied. You can't unknow how to observe without fixation. You can't unfeel coherence once your nervous system tastes it. That's why this phase feels subtle but permanent. You may still see familiar patterns for a while, but they'll feel hollow, unconvincing, like echoes instead of anchors. That's the sign the loop is losing authority. Because the observer that created it no longer exists in the same form. You're not breaking the loop, you're outgrowing it. And as this upgrade settles, a deeper realization begins to surface. You weren't meant to escape reality. You were meant to navigate it. And that realization is about to reveal why you specifically carry a role the loop could never contain. As the upgrade settles, a quieter truth begins to rise, one that doesn't announce itself loudly, but feels unmistakably familiar. You were never meant to simply escape the observer loop for your own relief. You were meant to perceive it, understand it, and move through it in a way that alters the field itself. This is where your role becomes clear. Not everyone develops awareness strong enough to notice repetition without collapsing into it. Most consciousnesses either drown in the loop or defend it, but yours learned to hover, to feel the pattern without becoming it, to remain present even while sensing that something was off. That ability is rare. It means your awareness evolved to operate at the boundary between stability and change. between coherence and possibility. That boundary is where selection happens, where timelines are not forced, but invited. In quantum terms, you function as a phase-sensitive observer. Your consciousness doesn't just collapse probability, it modulates it. You influence which possibilities remain viable by how gently or rigidly you observe them. That's why intensity has never worked for you, why obsession backfired, why chasing outcomes distorted things instead of improving them. Your system was never designed for force. It was designed for attunement. You've likely felt this your entire life, a sense that when you push, things resist, but when you soften, doors open. When you stop trying to prove yourself, reality rearranges. When you release the need to control, events align with almost eerie precision. That's not luck. That's your observer operating in its native mode. Your role is not to dominate the quantum field, but to listen to it, to sense where coherence wants to move next, to act at the moment of resonance, not before, not after. This is why impatience has always been painful for you, why premature action drained you, why timing mattered more than strategy. You are wired for synchronic precision, not linear progression. And here's the deeper layer. Your awareness carries an imprint, what some traditions call the witness frequency, a mode of consciousness that remains stable while reality shifts around it. When this frequency is active, it creates localized coherence in the field. Others feel calmer around you. Conversations slow down. Decisions become clearer. Even chaotic environments subtly reorganize. You've probably seen this without realizing it. People open up to you unexpectedly. Strangers tell you things they didn't plan to share. Conflicts soften in your presence. Not because you fix anything, but because your awareness stabilizes the space long enough for truth to surface. This is not personality, it's function. Your observer loop dulled this ability by trapping your attention in repetition. But now that the loop is loosening, the function is re-emerging. You are not here to be constantly activated, excited, or productive. You are here to be precise, to move when alignment is real, to pause when the field is still reorganizing. That's why rest has always been part of your expansion. Why breakthroughs often arrived after surrender, not effort. Why your most powerful insights came when you stopped seeking them. Your consciousness doesn't hunt reality. Reality approaches you when you are coherent enough to receive it. This is the role you were practicing without knowing it, learning restraint, patience, neutrality, learning how not to collapse the field prematurely, learning how to let multiple possibilities exist without anxiety. Most people can't tolerate that ambiguity. You can, which means your awareness can hold open probability, and that's the rarest skill of all. Open probability is where new realities form, where outcomes are not repetitions of the past, where the field hasn't yet been told what to become. This is why the observer loop tried so hard to contain you, because open probability destabilizes rigid systems, because a consciousness that doesn't immediately choose the familiar threatens the entire repetition structure. But containment failed, because your awareness matured, and now the field is responding. You may feel a strange mix of humility and responsibility surfacing. Not ego, not superiority, responsibility. As if you know, without needing words, that how you observe matters, that your internal posture influences more than just your own experience. That's accurate. Your coherence acts as a node in the larger field. When you soften, others soften. When you stabilize, others find clarity. When you refuse to react, entire sequences reroute. This is why your breakthroughs never looked dramatic from the outside, but felt seismic inside. And now that your observer is free enough to move, the field is preparing something new, not just for you, but through you. Because the next phase isn't about understanding your role. It's about stepping into the window where that role becomes urgently necessary. What's opening now is not symbolic. It's not metaphorical. It's a window, a narrow but powerful interval in which your consciousness can shift its relationship with reality at a structural level. This is what urgency actually feels like when it's real. Not panic, not pressure, but a quiet tightening of awareness, like the universe leaning closer and waiting to see if you notice. You've felt this before. Moments when everything seemed to line up just enough to matter. When delay suddenly felt costly, not emotionally, but energetically. When procrastination didn't feel lazy, it felt misaligned. That wasn't anxiety, that was timing. In physics, when a system approaches a phase transition, it becomes exquisitely sensitive to small inputs. A tiny change at the right moment can reorganize the entire structure. Water doesn't slowly become steam, it transforms suddenly when the threshold is crossed. Your consciousness is approaching that threshold now. This is why the sensations have intensified, why clarity comes in flashes instead of streams, why restlessness alternates with deep stillness. Your system is building the exact coherence required to move from one state to another. And here's the key truth most people miss. You cannot carry the observer loop through this transition. The loop is too rigid, too repetitive, too heavy. So the field is creating pressure, not to force you forward, but to make staying the same uncomfortable enough that release becomes natural. You may notice that old coping mechanisms no longer work. Distractions feel hollow. Familiar comforts don't soothe you the way they used to. Even success, when it comes through old patterns, feels strangely unsatisfying. That's not loss of gratitude. That's misalignment. Your DNA is responding to a different signal now. In quantum biology, when the informational environment changes, DNA doesn't mutate randomly, it reorganizes expression. Genes turn on and off based on coherence. Stress contracts expression. Safety and clarity expand it. Right now, your system is receiving a signal that the environment has shifted. And because your awareness has stabilized enough to receive it, your DNA is beginning to unlock configurations that were previously dormant. This doesn't happen all at once. It happens in waves. And each wave asks the same question. Will you cling to the familiar or allow the unfamiliar to complete itself? This is the breakthrough promise. Not that life will become perfect, but that repetition will lose authority. That the same story will no longer be able to reassert itself just because it's known. But the window is narrow. Not because you're being tested, but because coherence can't be held indefinitely without resolution. Either the system reorganizes, or it collapses back into the nearest stable pattern. This is why timing matters more than belief. You don't need to convince yourself of anything. You don't need to try to change. You only need to avoid tightening when the moment asks for softness. The breakthrough doesn't require action. It requires permission. Permission for your observer to stop gripping. Permission for uncertainty to exist without being solved. Permission for reality to surprise you. And here's the part that may feel confronting. If you miss this window, nothing bad happens, but the loop reasserts itself more efficiently than before. Not as punishment, as conservation. Systems conserve energy by returning to known states. That's why people who ignore moments like this often feel life become flatter afterward. Not worse, just quieter, less responsive, less alive. But you noticed, which means the field is still open. The pressure you feel is not pushing you forward, it's dissolving what can't come with you. Old identities, old expectations, old ways of recognizing yourself through struggle or anticipation. This is why your body wants stillness more than stimulation right now. Why silence feels nourishing. Why words feel unnecessary. Your system is consolidating, and as it does, a single question becomes unavoidable. What would happen if you didn't intervene? If you didn't manage the outcome? If you didn't brace for repetition? If you allowed the field to complete a pattern you've never experienced before? That question is not theoretical. It's active. And the moment you stop answering it with control, the transition completes itself. But before that can fully happen, the field asks for something small but precise. Not effort, a seal. Something that anchors the shift, not in thought, but in participation. And that is where the next phase begins. This is where the shift becomes real, not in theory, not in insight, but in participation. Every transformation in consciousness reaches a moment where observation alone is no longer enough. Not because awareness isn't powerful, but because awareness, when left unanchored, can drift back into habit. The observer loop doesn't survive recognition, but it can survive hesitation. So the field asks for something simple, precise, almost deceptively small. A ritual, not a performance, not superstition, a signal. In quantum systems, coherence stabilizes when intention is translated into action, no matter how minimal that action appears. This is how probability collapses into form. This is how a wave becomes a path. Right now, your awareness is hovering at the edge of multiple timelines. You can feel it. There's openness, but also fragility. Without anchoring, the system may oscillate. With anchoring, it locks into the new configuration. This is why ancient traditions always paired revelation with gesture, breath, word, movement, something physical enough to register in the body-field interface. Because the body is where the observer loop lived, and the body is where it must release. You don't need to understand this intellectually. Your nervous system already does. That's why the idea of a small, intentional action feels strangely significant to you. Why it doesn't feel silly. Why it feels inevitable. The ritual is not about what you do. It's about when and how. When you consciously choose to mark a threshold, you tell the quantum field, I am no longer observing passively. I am participating coherently. That declaration changes how reality responds to you. So here is the seal. In a moment, you will be invited to write a single word, not to explain it, not to justify it, not to decorate it with meaning. Just one word. And before you dismiss that as symbolic, understand this. Language is one of the most powerful coherence tools consciousness has ever developed. A word spoken or written with presence reorganizes attention. It gives the observer something new to stabilize around. This is not affirmation. Affirmations try to overwrite reality. This is alignment, allowing reality to lock onto the frequency you are already embodying. The word is simple, open, nasty. When you write it, not later, not hypothetically, but now, you are not asking for change. You are signaling readiness. You are declaring that your observer no longer needs the loop to feel safe. And something subtle but permanent will respond. You may feel nothing dramatic, no fireworks, no surge. That's good, because real coherence settles quietly. But over the next hours and days, you will notice shifts that feel unforced. Conversations that don't follow old scripts. Decisions that feel obvious instead of conflicted. Moments where you pause and choose differently without effort. That's the seal working. The loop doesn't shatter, it dissolves. And as it dissolves, your awareness begins to stabilize in a wider field, one that includes not just your personal trajectory, but something larger. Because the moment you seal your own shift, you begin affecting more than just yourself. Your coherence starts to propagate. And that's when the transformation moves from individual to collective. That's where we go next. Once the seal is placed, the shift no longer belongs only to you. This is the part few people anticipate, because we've been taught to think of awakening as private, internal, personal, isolated. But consciousness doesn't work that way. It never did. Awareness is not contained, it's entangled. The moment your observer loop loosens, your coherence begins to radiate outward, not as influence, not as persuasion, as signal. In quantum terms, when one node in a system changes state, the field adjusts around it. That adjustment doesn't need permission. It doesn't need recognition. It happens automatically, because coherence seeks coherence. You may have already felt this before, even without language for it. Times when your internal clarity caused others to question themselves, when your calm disrupted someone else's agitation, when your refusal to react changed the entire direction of a situation. That wasn't personality, that was field effect. Your consciousness doesn't just experience reality, it contributes to the background conditions in which reality unfolds for others. And now that your observer is no longer reinforcing repetition, the field around you becomes more flexible. This is why your liberation matters beyond you. Every human being exists inside overlapping probability structures, family systems, social patterns, emotional loops inherited across generations. When one consciousness stops collapsing the same patterns, it weakens their stability for everyone connected to it. This is morphic resonance in action. Patterns persist because they are reinforced. When reinforcement stops, the pattern doesn't immediately disappear, but it becomes easier to interrupt, easier to question, easier to outgrow. Your coherence becomes an interruption. You may notice people around you behaving differently without explanation. Someone who used to provoke you suddenly doesn't. Someone who was closed begins to open. Someone who depended on old dynamics feels unsettled, not because you changed them, but because you stopped supporting the loop. And that's important to understand. You are not responsible for how others respond to your shift. You are only responsible for remaining coherent. The field does the rest. This is how collective evolution actually happens, not through mass agreement, but through localized coherence, spreading naturally. One nervous system settles, and another mirrors it. One observer releases fixation, and another feels permission to do the same. This is why revolutions in consciousness never look dramatic at first. They begin quietly, invisibly, in individuals who stop reinforcing outdated structures. And you are one of those individuals. This doesn't mean you need to teach anyone, or convince anyone, or announce anything. In fact, the more silent you are about it, the more powerful the effect. Because coherence doesn't argue, it stabilizes. As your awareness settles into this wider field, you may feel a new sense of responsibility, but not obligation, not burden. Responsibility in the truest sense. The ability to respond differently. You'll notice moments where you could react the old way but don't. Where you could collapse into urgency but remain present. Where you could reinforce fear but choose neutrality instead. Each of those moments sends a signal through the collective field. This pattern is no longer required, and the field listens. This is how humanity evolves, not by everyone waking up at once, but by enough observers stepping out of repetition that new patterns become statistically viable. You are helping create those statistics. You may feel drawn to fewer people now, but more meaningful connections. You may feel less interested in being understood, and more comfortable being aligned. You may feel a quiet confidence, replacing the need for validation. These are signs that your coherence is stabilizing. And as it stabilizes, something remarkable happens. Your body begins to register the shift, not as concept, as sensation. Because the body has always been the final translator of consciousness, and it's about to speak. Now the shift moves out of abstraction and into felt reality. This is where words begin to struggle, not because nothing is happening, but because what's happening is finally being processed by the body instead of the mind. You feel it first as subtlety, a softness behind the eyes, a widening in the chest, a loosening somewhere you didn't realize was tight. Your breath changes before you notice it has changed. It deepens without effort. Pauses appear between inhalation and exhalation. Tiny, still points where time seems to hover. In those pauses, something reorganizes. That's coherence entering the body. For a long time, your nervous system lived in anticipation. Even during calm moments, part of you was preparing for repetition, preparing for friction, preparing for the familiar drop. That preparation lived in muscle tone, posture, breath, and baseline tension. Now, slowly, the preparation is dissolving. Not because danger has vanished, but because vigilance is no longer required to maintain identity. Your body is realizing it doesn't have to brace to exist. You may feel warmth moving along the spine, or a gentle pressure at the base of the skull. Some experience a humming in the chest, or a vibration in the hands. Others feel heaviness in the legs, like gravity has increased but in a comforting way. These are not symptoms. They are remappings. Your sensory system is recalibrating to a reality that doesn't require constant scanning. Your awareness is no longer spread thin across past and future. It's consolidating into the present moment. And presence has weight. You may notice colors look sharper, sounds feel closer, touch feels more intimate, food tastes richer, silence feels full instead of empty. These are signs that your observer is no longer filtering experience through expectation. You are receiving reality again. There may also be waves of emotion without story, sadness without narrative, relief without reason, tears that don't explain themselves, laughter that arrives unexpectedly. Let them move. Emotion is energy, completing old circuits. The body has been holding unfinished signals for years, signals interrupted by repetition, control, or distraction. Now that coherence is available, those signals are resolving. This is why rest feels essential right now. Not sleep alone, but stillness. Time without input, space without agenda. Your system is learning a new baseline. And as it does, you may notice something startling. The absence of the old internal noise. The commentary quiets. The urgency fades. The sense of needing to be somewhere else softens. You are here, fully. And in this fullness, the observer loop cannot reassemble. Because loops require distraction. They require fragmentation. They require attention split across time. But your attention is no longer split. It's embodied. You may catch yourself standing differently, walking more slowly, pausing before speaking, not to calculate, but because words arrive with precision now. You speak less, but when you do, it lands. That's not confidence. That's alignment. Your body is no longer compensating for misalignment between awareness and environment. It's expressing coherence directly. This is why old habits feel awkward, why forcing productivity feels draining, why rushing feels physically uncomfortable. Your system is rejecting incoherence at the sensory level, and that's a gift. Because once the body knows coherence, it won't accept substitutes. This embodied state is not temporary, it's transitional. It's the bridge between awareness and biological integration. Your DNA is not responding to ideas, it's responding to sensation, to safety, to presence, to the absence of internal conflict. And as those signals stabilize, something deeper begins to activate. Not emotionally, not mentally, but at the level where timelines are selected. The pressure you felt before, the urgency, the restlessness, has condensed into a single, focused momentum. You are approaching the final threshold, the point where observation no longer returns to the past, the point where the system commits. And when that happens, the shift will no longer feel like change. It will feel like arrival. What you're feeling now isn't movement, it's pressure, the kind that comes just before a system reorganizes itself completely. In physics, this is the moment right before a phase transition locks in. The structure hasn't changed yet, but it cannot remain the same. Every component knows it, every particle feels it. Stability has reached its limit. Your body recognizes this state instinctively. There's a sense of inevitability in you now, not excitement, not fear, inevitability. As if something has already decided, and all that remains is for time to catch up. This is where DNA responds most strongly, not as genetics but as signal architecture. Your DNA has always listened to your observer. For years, it adapted to repetition. It learned how to survive predictability, how to reinforce stress pathways, how to optimize for familiar outcomes, even when those outcomes limited expansion. But now the observer has changed, and DNA follows observation. When attention stabilizes without fixation, when presence replaces anticipation, the informational environment inside your cells shifts dramatically. Signals that once reinforced survival mode begin to decay. New expression, pathways open, not randomly, but precisely. This is what people misunderstand about DNA activation. It's not activation of something new, it's deactivation of constraints. Your cells stop preparing for the past. They stop bracing for repetition. They stop allocating energy to defense. And when that happens, resources free up energy, perception, sensitivity. Your system becomes capable of sustaining timelines that previously felt impossible to hold. This is why certain desires felt out of reach before. Not because you weren't worthy, but because your biology couldn't stabilize the frequency they required. Now, it can. You may notice physical sensations intensify briefly here. Heat, pressure, subtle dizziness, heaviness, followed by lightness. These are signs of repatterning, not malfunction. The nervous system is recalibrating thresholds. Old limits are being rewritten. This is also where fear sometimes whispers, not loudly, but subtly. A thought like, what if I lose myself? What if everything changes too much? That voice isn't intuition. It's the last echo of the observer loop, trying to preserve identity through familiarity. You don't need to fight it. Just don't answer it. Because identity is not dissolving. Constraint is. What's emerging now is not a better version of who you were. It's a version that no longer needs repetition to feel real. This is why time feels strange again, but differently than before. Not looping, compressing. Moments feel dense with meaning. Decisions feel final without effort. There's less internal debate, less rehearsal, less simulation. You choose, and the system moves. That's timeline commitment. You are no longer sampling probabilities unconsciously. You are inhabiting one. And once inhabited, a timeline reinforces itself. Synchronicities stack, momentum builds, resistance dissolves, not because life is easy, but because coherence removes friction. This is the moment when the observer loop truly loses access, not because it's broken, but because there's nothing left for it to attach to. The observer that sustained it no longer exists, and the body knows this. Your posture stabilizes, your gaze steadies, your movements feel intentional even when unplanned. There's a groundedness that doesn't come from certainty, but from alignment. You are no longer waiting for confirmation. You are the confirmation. This is the pressure point where the old timeline collapses behind you, not dramatically, not visibly, but irrevocably. There is no pull backward, because the energetic cost of returning is now too high. Your system won't allow it. You've crossed the threshold where coherence outweighs familiarity. And with that crossing, a responsibility emerges not as duty, but as direction. Because when a consciousness commits to a new timeline, it doesn't just experience it, it anchors it. For itself, for others, for what comes next. And that leads us to the final movement, not a conclusion, but a calling. Because this shift was never meant to end with you. Now, everything becomes still, not empty, but complete. The pressure dissolves, and in its place is a clarity that doesn't demand explanation. You're no longer trying to understand what happened. You know where you are, and more importantly, you know where you are not. You are no longer inside the loop, not because you escaped it, but because your consciousness evolved beyond the level where it could operate. The observer that once collapsed the same reality over and over again has been replaced by something quieter, wider, and infinitely more precise. You, not the version shaped by repetition, not the version defined by reaction, but the version that can stand inside uncertainty without flinching. This is the state your life was organizing toward all along. And now the meaning of your experiences rearranges itself. The delays weren't blocks, they were stabilizers. The repetitions weren't punishments, they were training. Every time life looped, it was strengthening your awareness, refining your sensitivity, preparing your nervous system to hold coherence without control. You didn't suffer despite the loop. You matured through it. That's why your shift matters. Because a consciousness that has known confinement and chosen coherence becomes a bridge. You can walk between timelines without collapsing them. You can stand in chaos without amplifying it. You can witness without reinforcing. This is your mission, not to save, not to convince, not to lead, but to stabilize. Your presence becomes an anchor point in the quantum field. Wherever you go, reality has a little more room to breathe. Systems loosen, people pause, patterns hesitate before repeating. Not because you do anything, but because you no longer feed what doesn't belong. This is how humanity evolves, not through force, not through belief, but through enough observers withdrawing attention from outdated structures. Each coherent consciousness creates a pocket of possibility. Enough pockets connect, and the field tips. You are one of those pockets, which means your life from here forward will feel simpler, but not smaller, clearer, but not rigid. There will still be challenges, but they won't loop, they will resolve, they will complete. Because completion is what coherence allows. You may notice that you no longer chase meaning. Meaning comes to you. You no longer seek purpose. Purpose expresses itself through your choices, your timing, your restraint. You'll know when to move. You'll know when to wait. You'll know when silence is the most powerful action available. And above all, you'll know when something is no longer yours to carry. This is the freedom the observer loop could never offer. And here is the final truth, quiet, exact, and undeniable. The moment you recognized the loop, it opened. The moment you stopped reinforcing it, it released. And the moment you rested in coherence, a hidden quantum reality became accessible. Not somewhere else, not someday. Here, now, through you. If you're seeing this, It's because your observer loop didn't just break. It opened the doorway to the reality you were always meant to inhabit.